Hello and welcome to Trojan Talk. I'm your host, Aaron Taylor. Today we'll be speaking to a guest that visited Troy University. She's also National Public Radio Correspondent, Debbie Elliott. Debbie, thanks for joining us here today.
Glad to be here.
And you visited Troy University as a guest of our national public radio station, Troy Public Radio, who was celebrating their 40th anniversary.
Happy birthday.
And bring some folks here to campus. But you had a chance to talk to some students. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But first, kind of give us a background of you and what you do with National Public Radio.
Well, I am our national correspondent who covers basically the South. So I look for stories that are both, newsy in nature and, get to have a little fun every once and again and tell something maybe that's a little bit more about history or culture or life and times in the South. But I cover a region maybe that stretches from Florida over to Louisiana.
And so, and you're based out of Orange Beach, which we learned on your visit here. But one might have not thought that Orange Beach would have been this hotbed of news for a news operation.
You'd be surprised. We've had a few hurricanes come through, an oil spill. You'd be surprised at the news that comes along the Gulf Coast. The Gulf Coast is a busy region, and I have been working with NPR since the mid-90s. And when I lived in Orange Beach and was doing some freelancing, they realized that was a part of the country we really didn't have anybody in at the time. We had a reporter in Miami and one over in Austin, Texas, and somebody up in Raleigh, North Carolina. But there was a big gap, and I was able to fill it.
And obviously, over the years, with a lot of stories came out of that area, the BP oil spill, and that's something you talked with the students about, even brought a prop with you here.
I brought my jar of tar balls. I can tell you all about tar balls, tar mats, tar mousse. I learned all the lingo during that, but it really wasn't funny. I mean, it was a really a long and slow unfolding crisis that affected 5 Gulf Coast states and a whole lot of people.
And one of the things that you talked about on your visit was the fact that NPR has increased in its popularity and its listenership, whereas a lot of other media outlets are stagnant or declining.
Right. So we've been in a period of change in journalism for sure, especially since the recession. But NPR has somehow found its way to grow audience, both on the radio and on all these new platforms. A lot of people listen to us mobilely on our NPR One app or look at us online on npr.org. But I think it's because we still do that kind of old-fashioned, foot-on-the-ground journalism. And that was my message today to the kids.
And one other thing you talked about is the connections and the partnerships with local affiliates, including Troy Public Radio and some of the things that you've done with Kyle Gassett here in Troy Public Radio.
Exactly. Kyle and I are in touch often on big stories that are unfolding in Alabama. As you know, he's between here and Montgomery a lot. So if there's a story that's happening and I can't be in Montgomery or Auburn, for instance, which was a story that happened this week in Auburn, Kyle is there and he's able to file for the network. Just last week when the whole Governor Bentley scandal was unfolding and right before the resignation, Kyle and I were a tag team. We worked together. He was at the courthouse, I was at the state capitol, and we were texting and talking and making sure that we were where we needed to be to cover the story. And that's something that, NPR has more than 1,000 stations that carry us, both in the United States and around the country. Now, all of those stations don't have news operations, don't get me wrong, but a lot of them do. And we are doing some really groundbreaking work in terms of covering state government at a time when newspapers are pulling out their reporters. So we're filling a local journalism gap that is a service to our audience. And it's really kind of gratifying that it's working, that people are still willing to support us.
And of course, once again, it's the stories, and you talked about that and telling people stories, and then actually getting to let them hear their stories and let them speak for themselves.
Yeah, that's the favorite thing about my job. Of course, this region is great because Southerners are, I think, just natural storytellers and like to share. But if you're willing to listen to somebody, they're going to share their story, and if you can share stories of how people are impacted by whether it be policy or a crisis or a natural disaster, whatever it may be, if you can share their story with the rest of the country, you're sort of forging these kinds of human connections and understanding that I think make us all better citizens.
Well, here's hoping that we can continue to hear some of those stories, making people better citizens here on Troy Public Radio. And folks out there who want to hear some of Debbie's work can tune into Troy Public Radio.
Tune
and hear
into
some
Troy
of that
Public
work.
Radio, yes.
And then thank you for your visit. And I'm sure that hopefully some journalism students have learned a thing or two about some effective
Oh, I'm
storytelling.
very impressed with the students that are working with Troy Public Radio and the journalism class. They were great today.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks. Enjoyed it.
And thank you for joining us on today's edition of Trojan Talk.